Thank you for listening in on our project review, What to Do When the CRC Returns a Project webinar today. So for the overview, first we're going to start off with a list of common acronyms that you're going to see in this presentation and most likely every day as a PDMG. Then we're going to get into some reasons that we see reworks or RFIs. After that, we're going to discuss communication through the different stages of the rework and RFI process. And then we're going to go over how to find and track reworks and RFIs in Grants Manager. After that, we move into how to avoid multiple reworks for the same project. And to close it out, we're going to cover what to do when you've completed a rework or satisfied the conditions of an RFI. So before we get started, let's go over some acronyms that we're going to see in this presentation. First, we have PDMG. That's your Program Delivery Managers. SI for Site Inspectors. TFL for the Task Force Leaders, whether that be PDMG or Site Inspection side. CRC, it's your Consolidated Resource Center. DVS is Data Validation Specialist. And RFI is your Request for Information. Common RFI and rework reasons. We've broken the common rework and RFI reasons into two categories, and those are documentation and data. Documentation will be an error on a document or a need for a document or anything that relates to documentation. These can often be solved by sending the CRC, Data Validation Specialist, the requested document to satisfy the RFI needs. The data portion is going to generally require a rework, and that's going to be making the necessary amendment in Grants Manager. And that's going to require either the PDMG or the SI to make changes. Some of the common things here you're going to see are maintenance records, GPS coordinates, SHPO documents, that's your State Historic Preservation Office, burn permits, temporary staging for debris or permanent disposal sites, the procurement and insurance policies, payroll policies, your fringe rate calculation, whether a building is 45 years old or older. Sometimes you'll run into issues with measurements and photos. If a road has a typo on it, it might say that it's 240 feet wide instead of 24 feet wide. The pictures are probably going to throw a red flag on that, and it may come back for an easy fix. One of my examples on that, I had a data validation specialist from the CRC contact me about a poured concrete drainage pipe that was well over 600 feet long. The drain was cracked throughout and couldn't easily be repaired by replacing a section or even by pouring new concrete, just because the damage was so severe in some places. And it would actually be cost effective on that one to replace it entirely with another material. I included 8 photos of the worst points of damage. And even with that, the data validation specialist sent it back because they hadn't seen the site. And luckily, they were just requesting more photos. And the site inspector that was out on site with me, and we were working in pairs, had taken over 100 photos, and we forwarded all of those to the specialist at the CRC. And after that, when they saw that the damage was throughout the entire thing, there were no more questions about that site. I'm going to talk about communication at every step of the process for a minute. Think about the other employees you talk to throughout the entire process of a project being formulated. Some other positions that you may need to interact with are your environmental and historic preservation group, mitigation, and insurance. And these three will most always have a hand in the review process. And anytime anyone reviews the project, there are potential questions. So just be prepared for those to come your way. And remember that communication is the foundation of this training, and it is arguably the most important skill we have for the work we do. Being able to effectively communicate, completely sidestep misunderstandings when it comes to project reviews. And that doesn't only mean verbal communication. Sometimes you'll need to be able to communicate visually with diagrams or photographs. I'm going to cover every interaction you might have during the review process. But on the following slides, I am going to discuss how communication can save time, money, and sometimes your overall sanity. Now, what do we need to expect when the CRC calls? And there are generally 3 reasons why you'll get a call from the CRC. Okay, for clarification, sometimes we use terminology that isn't common, and sometimes documents aren't easy to read. Sometimes people just want to make sure what they just read is saying what they think it's saying. So you may get a call just making sure that an applicant did in fact use 4,000 square feet of flooring in a school's bathroom, or is a GPS reading showing the accurate location. Next we have the RFI, and it's usually read in a negative context, and it doesn't need to carry that stigma. An RFI usually starts off as an informal RFI, which is a phone call, and it's just for clarification on something in the project. And if clarification can't be determined with that phone call, then at that point it can become an actual RFI that's official. And these are used solely for project tracking purposes, and it's just a general reminder that you've got something to do or you need something from your applicant. And RFIs don't always result in a rework, but sometimes they do, and that's just going to be project to project. And the next one we have is reworks. So after you get your informal RFI call from the data validation specialist, and you discuss with them what's needed, and the information they're requesting can't be obtained or entered into Grants Manager without the project being returned to you, then the data validation specialist will send the project back as a rework. And at this point, you've got it in your queue as an RFI. Note on this, scope of work clarity should be a priority. And when it comes to insurance documentation, please remember that before 2019, insurance information isn't available without searching in IMI. This review point is only triggered when an applicant notes that FEMA has provided assistance on a previous event. An example of this is you'll probably hear the phrase obtain and maintain. So for this, we're going to pretend that an applicant received FEMA assistance for a flood in 2018. During this flood, the applicant was told they would need to obtain flood insurance. The applicant then obtains the flood insurance and maintains the insurance through 2021. They then decide that it's no longer needed or it's just too expensive to keep for something they haven't needed for the last few years. And say a few more years pass with no issue. Now we're in the present time, and there's a hurricane resulting in wind and rain damage to the same building. Insurance is going to review the project and find that the applicant had previously received FEMA funding for this facility, and the applicant was required to obtain and maintain insurance on the facility. Discovering that the applicant failed to maintain their insurance, the new recent project will be disqualified. So now the CRC has returned your project to you. What do you do now? Now for this example, let's pretend you completed a project review. Everything looked 100% perfect. So you submit it to the CRC. Time passes and you're 16 projects down the road from it ever being a thought in your mind. And then you get an email or a phone call referencing it. Best thing to do here is to get into Grants Manager and open the project to review it, just so it's fresh in your mind. And while you're on the phone with them or reviewing the email, just go back and forth with that, and just to figure out what the request is for and see what changes need to be made, or if it's just a communication error and it's something that can be solved with just a discussion. On multiple occasions, I've seen a data validation specialist call a PDMG because they needed clarification on what an acronym on a receipt was. So don't stress too much if someone from the CRC contacts you. A lot of times it's just a really simple fix. Now let's say that the CRC specialist has reached out to you. You reviewed all the issues that they've outlined, and they've sent you a follow-up email with an itemized list of amendments to the project or a list of documents they need from the applicant. At this point, you need to identify if you have access to make the necessary changes on your own, or if you'll need to send it back another step to a site inspector. If you have to send the project back to the site inspector, first make sure that they're still deployed to the event. And whether they are or aren't, follow the chain of command on your event, as some events may want all reworks ran through the SITFL. So after you've identified who will be making the necessary changes, send the project back to them in Grants Manager and forward them the email from the CRC specialist so they have a list to look back on rather than just the memory of what you all talked about prior to you sending the project back to them. Now at this point, it's on them to make the necessary edits. And just a tip here, when you're discussing the project with them, ask them what time frame they think that the rework will be completed in. And if they have any upcoming inspections the next day, that's obviously going to take their priority. And this is really just to give you a time frame on when you should check back on the project with them. And sometimes it may be beneficial to everyone if a different SI completes the rework. And if that is the case, just follow up with their TFL and get it assigned to a different SI. If you can make all the changes yourself, then carry on and move forward with the requested changes. Grants Manager, what to look for when you get a rework. You should never be blindsided with a rework. Prior to it coming back to your queue, the data validation specialist should reach out to you to discuss the project. This doesn't always happen, and in the event it doesn't, you should receive an email along with a new bill in Grants Manager. The worst case scenario, if you log into Grants Manager and you have a project back from the CRC and you have no idea why, scroll down to the History tab and review that. Make sure that the lines are filtered to show the newest activity to the oldest, and this should immediately tell you what's going on with the project as well as who sent it back. At this point, you can review the reason it was sent back and follow up with the data validation specialist who returned it to further discuss the project issues. If the CRC does call, take notes when they call. Don't trust that you'll be able to remember every item that needs to be changed on a project, and sometimes they will discuss other things that you find while you're going through the project that aren't going to be on their list. The data validation specialist should list out all the items that need attention in Grants Manager with a follow-up email. And you're going to be able to compare that with your notes just to make sure everything gets fixed. If you do receive an RFI, you have 2 weeks to complete it, and this can be extended for an additional 2 weeks, but that extension can only be granted one time. If the notes that the CRC data validation specialist supplied are not clear enough, you can call them back and just talk to them about what they requested. So if you have an issue they've noted doesn't make sense, or if you need more description on the reason for the RFI, just contact the data validation specialist to discuss it. And as always, keep your supervisor in the loop as to what step you're on with the project, especially if it looks like it may take more time than normal to complete. In 2011 through 2012, I was working Hurricane Sandy and was tasked with several applicants in Martha's Vineyard. One of them was working on a dredging project that needed further information. I contacted them to get said information and found out that the single point of contact for that applicant was in France for about 3 weeks and wouldn't be back or around a phone for contact until that time. So I let my manager know what was going on with it and let the people in QA know what was going on with it, just so they wouldn't be asking me all the time, hey, you've gone over the time frame on this, where's this project at? You just upfront let them know what was going on. Now, when it comes to RFI tracking, the route you're going to take on this is you're going to log into Grants Manager and you're going to click the project button on the side of the screen. You're going to use the drop down to find your event, and then you're going to enter your applicant's name. On the status bar, you're going to click active for PA. Then you're going to go over to currently being reworked and select yes. If it has an RFI, also select yes, and then you're going to click run query. After that, you're going to click the star icon and then select the dashboard you wish to add the tracking tile to. And after you do this, you can group your applicant profile tile and the RFI tile together. And that way you can see everything that's going on with those applicants at the same time. Now, another thing to do here is to subscribe to all of your applicants in Grants Manager. To do this, you simply go to the applicant profile, and below your bell, there will be an options button. You're going to click the options button, and you'll see the word subscribe next to a paper airplane icon. Click that, and you're now subscribed to updates from that applicant. And just repeat both of these steps for each of your applicants individually. Now we have some steps to avoid multiple reworks for the same project. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but always remember to communicate with the CRC data validation specialist. You're going to talk to the CRC specialist about the project amendments they're requesting. You're going to talk to them about the changes you've made to the project before submitting it back to them. Before the SI team member submits the project back to you, they need to be discussing the changes with you just to make sure that everything was captured and all the changes that need to be made were made. So at every step of the process, we just need some communication here. So before the site inspector completes the project and submits it back to you, go over it with them. That way the review is fresh in your mind when you get it back. And then you can call the CRC data validation specialist and go over it with them before you submit it back to them. And that way when it gets back to their queue, it's still fresh in their mind. They've already reviewed it with you. They've already seen that all the changes they requested were made, and it makes their review process here a lot more streamlined, a lot quicker. They're going to be able just to pretty much push it forward from where they got it onto the next phase. Okay, so now we have the webinar summary, and seeing this slide means this presentation is nearing its end. And you should be able to have a general understanding of why projects are returned from the CRC. We should now know the steps to take when completing a rework. We should know how to avoid multiple reworks for the same project, as well as knowing how to track reworks and RFIs. And this is just going to provide a little bit more of an understanding of your role in the process and how to handle each step.
Now we have some compliance information for you.
To report corruption, waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement, and/or misconduct, contact the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General by phone at 1-800-323-8603 or via the website or mailing address listed on the screen now. Procurement requirements are among the most complicated parts of the PA grant process, and noncompliance can result in deobligation of funding. Please make sure that you are following FEMA's procurement guidance for recipients and subrecipients. Federal requirements for procurement and contracting are described in 2 CFR Part 200. The Procurement Disaster Assistance Team, or PDAT, offers some training and tools on their website, www.fema.gov/grants/procurement.
Thank you for watching.